I raised my wife's kids as my own and paid for everything they needed. But when they said, I'm just some guy mom married because she was desperate, I stopped providing and moved out. As a former military man, I've always believed in a few core things: working hard for what you have, taking responsibility for your actions, and being loyal to the people you care about. Those weren't just empty words to me. They were principles I lived by every single day. Principles that got me through 2 tours in Afghanistan and Iraq. I also learned the hard way, mind you, that loving the wrong people can really mess you up. The battlefield teaches you to trust your fellow soldiers without question, but civilian life isn't so straightforward. This whole story I'm about to tell you is about how those beliefs of mine got tested and how everything I thought I knew about family came crashing down. It's not a happy story, to be honest. It's about getting taken advantage of, about being used, and about finally realizing when enough is enough, even when that realization threatens to trigger all those dark memories I've worked so hard to keep at bay. I'm not going to sugarcoat anything. I'm going to tell it like it happened because I think it's important to be real about these things. We often hear about happy endings, but sometimes the ending is just, well, an ending. And sometimes that's okay. It's necessary even, like knowing when to retreat from a battle you can't win. I'm not trying to be some kind of saint here. I made mistakes. I was probably too trusting, believed in the best in people, and ignored some red flags, just like I ignored the warning signs of my own PTSD for too long. And I paid the price for both. But I also learned a lot. So, how did this all begin? It started with a woman named Vanessa. She was a widow. Her husband, a fellow military officer, my friend, actually, had been killed in action. I still remember that day, holding his hand as he slipped away, promising him I'd check on his family when I got home. She had 2 young kids, a little boy named Zachary, who was around 4 years old and full of energy, and a baby girl named Olivia, who was just barely starting to walk. I met them at Rick's funeral, and I could see right away that Vanessa was struggling. It wasn't just that she was grieving, although of course she was. It was more than that. She was completely exhausted. I mean, visibly exhausted. You could see it in the way she carried herself, in the dark circles under her eyes, in the way she seemed to be running on fumes. It wasn't just an "I'm tired" kind of exhaustion. It was a deep, bone-weary kind of exhaustion that I recognized all too well from my time in combat zones. I didn't step in because I felt obligated or anything like that. It wasn't some kind of promise to my fallen brother in arms, though that was part of it. It wasn't a knight in shining armor complex. It was just, I saw her, really saw her. I saw her struggling with those 2 kids, and I wanted to help. My own parents had died when I was young, and I knew what it was like to face the world alone. I wanted to make things a little bit easier for her and those kids. I felt this genuine desire to provide some stability, some support in their lives. I started helping out with little things at first, offering to watch the kids so she could get a nap, running errands, fixing things around their apartment that had been neglected. Sometimes, while she slept, I'd have these moments with Zach where I'd see Rick in his eyes, and it would hit me hard. I'd have to turn away, use those breathing techniques they taught us for managing panic attacks. But it quickly became more than occasional help. I found myself wanting to be a father figure to those kids. Their own dad was gone, just like mine had been, and I felt like I could step into that role. Not to replace Rick, of course, but to give them the love and support that every child deserves. I guess you could say I was applying my military discipline and values: hard work, responsibility, loyalty, to civilian life, to the situation they were in. I wanted to give them what their father couldn't anymore. Not because I had promised Rick, but because I genuinely wanted to. It felt right. It felt like maybe this was why I had survived when so many others hadn't: to be here now for his family. It felt like the start of something good, something real. And for a long time, it was good. I really threw myself into it. I used my military management experience to land a higher paying job at a security firm, worked long hours, not just to pay the bills, but to make sure those kids had everything they needed. Good schools, nice clothes, that comfortable home in the suburbs I bought for us, plenty of food on the table, all of it. I made it a priority to put their needs above my own, just like I'd been trained to do for my unit. I wasn't just trying to meet their basic needs either. I wanted to erase any sense of loss they might have felt because their dad wasn't around. I wanted to fill that void, to make them feel secure and loved, the way I never quite felt after losing my own parents. It wasn't just about the material things, though. I was there for them emotionally, too, even though expressing emotions has never been easy for me. I went to every single school event, every soccer game where Zach played, but rarely put in the effort, every play Liv performed in. I cheered the loudest. I was their biggest fan. I organized birthday parties, planned family vacations, did all the dad things that I'd never experienced myself, but somehow knew were important. And they responded. For a while, they loved me back. Liv even called me Papa Ethan for a time. Not just Ethan, but Papa. And you know what? I believed it. I really did. I felt like the luckiest man alive. Like maybe I had finally found the peace that had eluded me since coming home from war. I thought I had created this genuine, loving family. I was so caught up in the idea of it, in the desire for it to be true, that I didn't see the cracks that were starting to form. I was so focused on building this perfect picture that I ignored the warning signs, just like I'd ignored the symptoms of my PTSD until that panic attack in the grocery store. Growing tensions. Looking back, I can see that I was building on a foundation that wasn't as solid as I thought it was. But at the time, I was all in. I was invested heart and soul, the way I'd been trained to commit to a mission. I was dedicated to making this work, to being the best father figure I could be. I poured everything I had into it, and for a while, it seemed like it was paying off. We had our routines, our traditions, our inside jokes. We'd even established Sunday Fun Day, where we'd all go out for ice cream after dinner, just like my unit had our post-mission rituals. We were a family. I was sure of it. That feeling is what kept me going, even on those nights when the nightmares would wake me, when I'd find myself checking and rechecking the locks on all the doors and windows at 3 a.m. The first signs of trouble were small, almost insignificant. Little comments from the kids, a bit of back talk, a roll of the eyes here and there. Nothing major, nothing you wouldn't expect from kids growing up. I brushed it off, using the same mental discipline I'd relied on in the service. I told myself it was just typical teenage stuff, a phase they were going through. I didn't want to see it as anything more than that. I remember one time, Zach, he must have been around 13 or 14, made some snarky comment about how I wasn't cool because I didn't let him stay out late with the rich kids from his school. Liv, who was a few years younger, chimed in with some equally disrespectful remark about how none of her friends had such strict parents. It stung a little, cutting deeper than I let on, but I just laughed it off. I told myself they were just testing boundaries, pushing limits, like all teenagers do. As the kids got older, the disrespect became more pronounced. Zach, by the time he was 17, was a full-blown teenager with an attitude bigger than my old platoon sergeants. He started ignoring curfews, dismissing any advice I offered, and generally acting like he was entitled to do whatever he wanted. He'd sarcastically salute me sometimes, mockingly calling me Sir or Captain Control Freak when I'd ask him to do basic chores. It was classic teenage rebellion, I suppose, but it felt different, sharper somehow. There was a meanness to it that I couldn't ignore, a deliberate attempt to target what he knew about my military background. Liv, who was around 14 at this point, started mimicking her brother's behavior. She'd roll her eyes at me, ignore my instructions, and dismiss any concerns I raised. She'd started posting these TikTok videos making fun of her uptight stepdad that her friends would comment on with laughing emojis. They formed this united front against me, making it clear that they didn't respect my authority, or me for that matter. It was like they were ganging up on me, testing how far they could push me before I'd break. What made it worse was Vanessa's reaction, or rather, her lack of reaction. She wouldn't intervene. She wouldn't back me up. She'd just sit there, usually scrolling through Instagram on her phone, pretending not to notice what was going on. Sometimes she'd even subtly undermine me, posting her own social media updates about surviving another family dinner with an eye roll emoji. Maybe she'd sigh like I was the one being unreasonable when I asked Zach about his dropping grades, or questioned Liv about why she needed a $300 handbag. It wasn't just passive. It was almost like she was actively encouraging their behavior, liking their disrespectful social media posts about me. She'd make excuses for them. Oh, they're just tired. Or, they're going through a phase. Or, we need to keep the peace. You know how triggering conflict can be for you. It was always something. But what it really was a pattern of enabling their disrespect. She was letting them get away with it. And in doing so, she was eroding my authority and making me feel increasingly isolated, like I was back overseas, separated from everyone who understood me. I started to feel like I was the only one who cared about setting boundaries, about teaching them right from wrong, about preparing them for the real world that doesn't hand you everything on a silver platter. I was starting to question Vanessa's motives. Was she really this oblivious, or was she deliberately undermining me? Was she still posting those single mom who does it all captions on her photos, even though I was the one paying all the bills? I had my first real wake-up call around this time when I overheard Vanessa on the phone with her friend Heather, laughing about how Ethan thinks he's their dad or something, but I still didn't fully grasp what was happening. The real breaking point, the moment when everything started to fall apart, happened one night. Zach came home way past his curfew. I'm talking hours late, and he hadn't called or texted or anything. With my military background and PTSD, the worry was almost unbearable. My mind racing through worst-case scenarios, the same panic I felt when a soldier went missing in the field. But when he finally strolled in, reeking of beer, he acted like it was no big deal. I asked him calmly, working hard to control my breathing, the way my therapist had taught me, where he had been, just a simple question, wanting some accountability. He didn't even look at me. He just said, "Relax, I'm not a kid." That was it. No apology, no explanation, just a dismissive brush off. And then he said, "You're not my real dad. Stop acting like you own me. You're just some guy mom married because she was desperate." Just like that. All those years of love and care and support thrown back in my face. It was like a punch to the gut, bringing back flashbacks of physical blows I'd taken in combat. My hands started shaking, and I had to clench them to hide it. Liv, who was standing there in her pajamas, chimed in, "Yeah, you're just some guy mom married after dad died. You don't get to tell us what to do." As if all the years we'd spent together, all the memories we'd made, all the nightmares I'd fought through to be there for them, meant absolutely nothing. Something inside me just broke. It wasn't anger, not yet. I'd learned to control that years ago. It was more like a profound sense of disillusionment, similar to that moment when I realized that the war we were fighting had no clear purpose. And the worst part? Vanessa didn't say a word. She just stood there, scrolling through her phone, silent. Her silence was the ultimate betrayal. It confirmed everything I had been starting to suspect, that I was nothing more than a convenience to them, a provider, someone to take care of the things their real dad couldn't, an ATM with a pulse. It was the defining moment, the moment I realized that the family I thought I had built was a lie, just like some of the missions I'd been sent on based on faulty intelligence. It wasn't long after that first incident that it happened again. This time it was Liv. She had made a mess in the kitchen, trying to make some complicated drink she'd seen on TikTok, and I asked her to clean it up. Simple enough, right? Basic responsibility. But instead of doing it, she just looked at me and said, "Why don't you do it? It's your house, isn't it? That's why Mom married you, for your money and this house." That stung worse than shrapnel. It wasn't just the disrespect. It was the way she said it, like I was some kind of servant, like my only purpose was to clean up after them and provide financial support. It highlighted my outsider status, reducing me to nothing more than a provider, a cleaner, a wallet. It was a deliberate attempt to belittle me, to make me feel small, to strip away the dignity and respect I'd earned through years of service and sacrifice. The breaking point. And then Zach, as if on cue, chimed in again with the same line. "You're not even our real dad." Our real dad was a hero. The word hero cut through me like a knife. Rick had been my friend, my brother in arms, and here was his son, using his memory as a weapon against me. It was like they were tag teaming me, reinforcing their rejection, making sure I understood my place, or rather, my lack of place, in their lives, despite everything I'd sacrificed for them. But this time, it was Vanessa's reaction that really sealed the deal. She didn't yell, didn't get angry at them for their cruelty. She just looked at me casually, without even looking up from her phone where she was probably updating her Instagram story, and said, "They have a point, Ethan. Maybe you should back off. You're not their father, and your military rigidness isn't what they need right now." That was it. That was the moment I knew it was over. It wasn't just the children's disrespect anymore. It was Vanessa's explicit agreement with them. She was siding with them against me, the person who had dedicated years of his life to caring for them, who had battled his own demons to be there for her children. The person who had fulfilled his promise to their dying father. It wasn't a moment of anger or even hurt, not really. I'd felt worse pain watching friends die. It was a moment of clarity, like when the fog of war suddenly lifts and you can see the battlefield clearly. I finally understood. I was done. There was no going back. This wasn't a family, it was a sham. And I was finally ready to walk away. Just like I'd eventually had to walk away from the military when my PTSD became too severe. It was a quiet realization, a calm acceptance of the truth, similar to when I finally accepted my diagnosis. I was no longer fighting to hold on to something that wasn't real. I was ready to let go, to retreat from a battle I couldn't win. So I did something I never thought I'd do. I stopped. I stopped giving, stopped caring, stopped trying. It wasn't a sudden, impulsive decision. It was a deliberate, conscious choice, made with the same careful consideration I'd use planning a tactical withdrawal. I just withdrew. I stopped providing for them. No more rides to school in my SUV. No more allowances for the latest fashion trends. No more protection from the consequences of their actions. No more advice on homework or college applications. No more concern about their futures. I let them experience the consequences of their own actions. It was a complete 180 from how I had been for years. I had always been there for them, no matter what, the way I'd been there for my unit. Now I was gone, emotionally, if not yet physically. It hurt, I won't lie. My hands would shake sometimes when I'd ignored Liv's requests for help with her science project. It went against every instinct I had, every value I'd been taught about never leaving anyone behind. I had invested so much of myself in this family, and it was incredibly painful to just walk away. But I knew it was necessary. I had to protect myself, the way my therapist had been telling me for years. I knew it wouldn't be easy. I knew they would react, that they would try to push back. But I was prepared for that. I'd faced worse in combat. I had reached my limit. I had given them everything I had, including parts of myself. I wasn't sure I could ever get back, and they had thrown it back in my face. I was done being the doormat, the silent provider, the emotional punching bag. At first, they laughed. They mocked me, made sarcastic comments, smirked at me whenever I walked by. Zach would salute me mockingly when I refused to give him money for another pair of expensive sneakers. Liv posted videos of herself fake crying with captions like, "When your stepdad stops being an ATM." They thought they had won. They thought they didn't need me. They were relying on Vanessa, thinking she could provide everything I had been providing. They were wrong, and deep down, I think they knew it. They'd make these little jabs, mimicking my instructions, making fun of the way I used to try to set boundaries, posting social media updates ridiculing my military precision about everything. They'd say things like, "Oh, are we breaking the rules, Captain Control Freak?" with this exaggerated emphasis, rolling their eyes and smirking at each other. It was like they were trying to provoke me, to get a reaction out of me, to make me snap the way they probably thought all veterans with PTSD eventually do. Vanessa, oh, she made sure to pick up my slack. She funded their little shopping trips, made sure their weekends were still filled with fast food outings and unnecessary spending. She kept them comfortable, kept them cocky, and kept feeding them the idea that they didn't need me. She even took out a small loan to keep up appearances, I later found out. But I knew it wouldn't last. I knew Vanessa's resources were limited. She didn't have the kind of income I did from my security firm job. Her part-time receptionist work barely covered groceries, let alone Zach's college application fees or Liv's smartphone habits. She couldn't keep up that level of spending forever. So I remained quiet. I let them have their fun. I let them think they were getting away with it. I knew the reality check was coming. I didn't engage. I didn't argue. I didn't react. I just observed, silently waiting for the inevitable, the way I'd been trained to remain still on reconnaissance missions. It was a strange kind of patience, born out of the certainty that I was right. I knew their arrogance was built on a shaky foundation, and I knew that foundation would eventually crumble. I just had to wait it out, conserving my emotional energy the way I'd conserve supplies on a long deployment. It was a waiting game, and if there's one thing military service teaches you, it's how to wait. And then, slowly but surely, things started to change. The shopping trips became less frequent. The fast food outings became fewer and farther between. New clothes stopped appearing. Zach's Instagram posts became less frequent, less showy. Small changes at first, but noticeable to someone trained to spot patterns. Then bigger problems started to arise. School fees became a concern. Zach's senior year expenses weren't going to pay themselves. Zach got into some trouble at school for talking back to a teacher, and Vanessa didn't know how to handle it without my diplomatic intervention. Liv broke her phone, that expensive model I'd reluctantly purchased last Christmas, and there was no money to fix it, let alone replace it. I remember the first morning, Zach missed the ride I used to give him to school in my SUV. He'd always taken it for granted, never even bothering to say thank you most of the time, often wearing his earbuds the entire trip. Now he was on his own. He ended up having to run for the bus, and from what I heard from a neighbor, he barely made it, huffing and puffing and completely out of breath, his carefully styled hair a mess in the rain. It's a small thing, I know, but it was symbolic. It was the first real crack in their comfortable world. And I'll admit, I felt a sense of satisfaction. Not joy, not exactly, but a quiet vindication, like when a training exercise proves your point. I knew what it was like to struggle, to have to work for everything you have. I remembered those days when I was young, having to hustle after my parents died, joining the military partly because I needed structure and security. They, on the other hand, had always had everything handed to them, first by their mother, and then by me. I didn't say anything, of course. I just watched, from behind my newspaper at breakfast, or from my home office, where I'd started spending more and more time. I saw the frustration on Liv's face when she realized her broken phone wasn't going to be magically replaced. I heard her complaining to Vanessa in the kitchen, and I heard Vanessa's increasingly flimsy excuses. Maybe for your birthday, honey. Or let's look at the budget next month. She was starting to run out of money, and she was starting to realize that she couldn't provide everything I had. That same day, Liv had a complete meltdown, whining about how unfair it was that she couldn't get her phone fixed while all her friends were posting on their group chat without her. Vanessa finally admitted, in a voice that was barely above a whisper, that she didn't have the money right then. Your real dad would have understood, she added, a low blow that even Liv seemed uncomfortable with. It was a small admission, but it was a significant one. It was the first time she had openly acknowledged the limitations of her resources. It was the beginning of the end of their denial. The reality of their situation was starting to sink in. They were starting to understand that their privileged lifestyle had been dependent on me, on the person they had so readily dismissed and disrespected. The free ride was over, and they were finally starting to feel the bumps in the road, just like I'd felt when I first came back from overseas with nothing but nightmares and a duffel bag. It was a harsh awakening, but a necessary one. My absence was making its presence felt. It wasn't long after the phone incident that Vanessa finally confronted me in our bedroom. She was angry, of course. She accused me of being childish, of neglecting my responsibilities, of letting my PTSD cloud my judgment. That word, responsibilities, stuck with me. It revealed how she truly saw me, not as a partner, not as a father figure, but as someone who had obligations to fulfill, a provider, a walking ATM, a replacement for the husband she'd lost. She went on, blaming me for everything that was going wrong. She said I was abandoning them, that I was being selfish, that I wasn't acting like a real man or honoring Rick's memory. She tried to make me feel guilty, to make me feel like I was the bad guy. It was all projection, of course. She was deflecting her own failures onto me, her own inability to be honest with her children about their financial reality. I let her rant. I let her get it all out, using the same patient silence I'd developed during particularly intense debriefings. And then, when she finally paused for breath, I asked her a simple question, in the calm, measured tone I'd used in countless tense situations. I asked her why she had never defended me, why she had always sided with the children, even when they were being disrespectful. I asked her why she had allowed them to treat me the way they did, when I'd done nothing but love and support them. The truth emerges. And that's when it happened. That's when the truth finally came out, like an enemy revealing their position after hours of tense silence. She sneered, and I mean sneered, with a coldness I hadn't seen since facing down hostile forces overseas, and said, "Because I agree with them, Ethan. You were never really their father. Rick was their father. You're just the replacement who pays the bills." It was like a slap in the face, but it was also a confirmation of everything I had suspected, like finally getting intelligence that confirmed your worst fears about a mission. But it didn't stop there. She went further. She actually admitted that she had told the children not to let me establish any authority over them. "I told them not to let you control them with your military mindset," she said, her voice dripping with contempt. "I told them you weren't their real father. I raised them alone before you, and I can do it again. We only needed you until we got back on our feet." That was the real kicker. It wasn't just passive inaction. It was deliberate, long-term undermining. like discovering an ally had been feeding information to the enemy all along. She had actively encouraged their disrespect, poisoned their minds against me, all while smiling to my face and enjoying the lifestyle my income provided. Zach and Liv were standing in the hallway watching the whole thing, arms crossed, smug little looks on their faces, phones probably recording the whole confrontation for their social media followers. It was like they were enjoying the show, spectators at an execution. And in that moment, I thought, this is it. This is who they really are. Not the sweet, innocent children I had tried to love and care for. Not the family of my fallen brother in arms, but spoiled, entitled brats, enabled by their manipulative mother who had been using me from the beginning. Despite the pain, despite the betrayal that cut deeper than any physical wound I'd suffered in combat, I felt a sense of relief. It was over. The charade was finished. I had my answer. There was no ambiguity, no room for doubt. I knew without a shadow of a doubt that I had made the right decision to walk away, to save myself from this emotional battlefield. The truth was ugly, but it was also liberating. I was finally free, like being discharged from a mission that had become compromised beyond salvation. But things got worse before they got better. The kids, fueled by Vanessa's anger and their own sense of entitlement, started acting out even more. It started with small things. My personal belongings would go missing. My military service medal, the watch my commanding officer had given me upon discharge. Then some of my important work files disappeared from my computer, including security protocols I'd developed that could cost me my job if compromised. I started to suspect they were messing with me, but I didn't have any proof, and part of me didn't want to believe they would stoop so low. Then it escalated. One morning, I found my car keyed, a long, deep scratch running down the side of the vehicle Rick had helped me restore before his last deployment. Someone had also torn the small photo of our unit from the dashboard and left it ripped on the seat. That was when I knew I had to do something. This wasn't just teenage rebellion anymore. This was targeted psychological warfare. I installed security cameras, discreetly, inside and around the house. I didn't tell anyone, not even Marcus when he called to check on me. I just wanted to gather evidence, using the same methodical approach I'd been trained to use in intelligence gathering. And I got it. A few days later, I caught them on camera. Zach and Liv in my closet, going through the lockbox where I kept my military mementos and letters from Rick. They were laughing, tearing up my dress uniform, shredding with scissors the last letter Rick had written to me before he died. "Look at this," Zach was saying, Captain Control Freak's precious uniform. It was a deliberate act of vandalism against the things that mattered most to me. A direct attack on my past, my service, my connection to their real father. I didn't confront them. I didn't yell or scream, though my hands shook so badly I had to sit down and go through my PTSD breathing exercises. I just kept quiet. I documented everything. I saved the video footage. I took photos of the damage. I gathered all the threatening texts they had sent me, the social media posts mocking my military background, all the evidence of their escalating hostility. I was playing along, letting them think they were winning, while I was secretly preparing for my departure, using the tactical withdrawal skills I'd learned in the service. I knew I needed to protect myself, not just emotionally, but legally. I knew this was going to get ugly, and I wanted to be prepared. I was building my case, gathering the ammunition I would need to fight back if it came to that. It was a sad and pathetic situation, but I was determined to handle it with as much dignity and composure as I could muster. I was not going to stoop to their level. I was not going to let my PTSD get the better of me and react with the anger they were trying to provoke. I was going to be smart, strategic, and silent, like I'd been trained to be. The next step was seeing a lawyer, a fellow veteran who understood what I was going through. I explained the whole situation, showed him all the evidence I had gathered. He listened patiently, nodding occasionally. And when I was finished, he assured me that I had a strong case. "They're targeting your service experience, Ethan. That's not just disrespectful, it's cruel." We discussed divorce, and he even suggested a restraining order, given the escalating hostility of the children and their deliberate triggering of my PTSD symptoms. I also filed a police report about the property damage, especially the destruction of my military items. It felt strange reporting my stepchildren to the police, but I knew it was necessary. I needed to create an official record of their behavior to protect myself from any future accusations or legal challenges. It was another step in the process of severing ties, of disentangling myself from this toxic situation. Then, one afternoon while Vanessa and the kids were out at one of her friend Heather's social gatherings, I packed a bag. I didn't take much, just the essentials, the things that really mattered to me. My military documents, the few photographs and mementos that hadn't been destroyed, the letters from Rick that I'd managed to save. I left everything else behind. The furniture, the appliances, all the material possessions I had accumulated over the years. They weren't important. What was important was my freedom, my peace of mind, my chance to heal from this betrayal. I called Marcus, who immediately offered his spare room. "Stay as long as you need, brother," he said, the kind of loyalty I hadn't experienced since leaving the service. I left an envelope on the kitchen counter. Inside were the divorce papers, along with copies of all the supporting documents, the police report, the photos of the damage, the screenshots of the threatening texts, the video evidence of them destroying my things. It was a formal act of separation. There was no going back, no room for negotiation. I walked out of that house, and I didn't look back. I got in my car, the one with the long scratch down the side and Rick's unit sticker still barely visible on the bumper, and I drove away. I didn't have a long-term plan, not really. I just knew I needed to get out, to escape the toxic environment I had been living in, to find a safe place where I could start to heal. The final step was financial. I closed all the joint accounts, removed Vanessa's access to my funds. I set up automatic payments for Zach's school tuition directly to the school. I wouldn't punish his education, despite everything, but cut off all the extras, the allowances, the credit cards, the shopping accounts. It was a harsh move, I know, but it was necessary. I had to cut off her ability to continue supporting the children's entitled behavior. I had to make it clear that the gravy train had stopped. It was the final severing of ties, the ultimate act of withdrawal. It was over. The mission was complete, even if the outcome wasn't what I had hoped for. As expected, Vanessa went ballistic. She called me repeatedly, leaving furious voicemails, accusing me of being a coward, of abandoning them, of being a terrible person, of dishonoring Rick's memory. She claimed she could manage without me, that she didn't need my money, that she would be better off without my military control issues in her house, that she'd find someone else. It was all bluster, of course, familiar to anyone who's faced an opponent who knows they're defeated. She was in denial, refusing to accept the reality of the situation. I didn't answer her calls. I didn't respond to her texts. I just blocked her number. I refused to engage in any further conflict. I had said my piece. I had taken my stand. And I was done, focusing on my recovery with the help of my therapist and support group. I needed to focus on my own well-being, on building a new life for myself, on managing my PTSD symptoms that had flared up dramatically during this ordeal. Then the children started messaging me. At first, it was the same kind of casual, arrogant messages they had been sending before. But gradually, the tone changed. They started to sound worried, even regretful. Zach's Instagram posts became less flashy, more subdued. They apologized for their behavior, admitted that things were difficult, that they were struggling without my support, that they missed the stability I had provided. Finally, I received a direct message from Liv on Instagram. It wasn't public like her previous mocking posts. It was private, meant only for me. And it was just 3 words. I miss you. It was attached to a photo of us from 2 years ago at the beach when she had fallen asleep against my shoulder after a day of building sand castles. A time before things had gone so wrong. It was a significant shift, but it was too late. The damage was done. The trust was broken, like a building that had been bombed beyond repair. I couldn't go back, even if I wanted to. The emotional minefield was too dangerous to navigate again. I remained silent. I didn't respond, though my hand hovered over the keyboard for longer than I'd care to admit. I recognized their regret, but I stood firm in my decision. I had learned a painful lesson, and I wasn't going to repeat my mistakes. I had given them everything I had, and they had thrown it back in my face. I was done. My silence was my answer. It was my way of saying, you made your choice, and now you have to live with the consequences. The way we all must live with the consequences of our choices, in war and in peace. So that's my story. It's not a pretty one, but it's a real one. And I learned some valuable lessons from it. The biggest one? Never, ever let people take you for granted. Never beg for respect, especially when you've earned it through sacrifice and service. Never waste your energy on people who don't value you. And when you're being used, when you're being disrespected, walk away. Don't hesitate. Don't look back. Use the same discipline and resolve that gets you through a battlefield. It's a hard lesson to learn, and it's even harder to put into practice. But it's essential for your own well-being, for your own self-respect, for your own survival. You deserve to be treated with kindness, with respect, with love. And if you're not getting that, you have the right, the obligation, to walk away, just as you would from any other dangerous situation. Some people only realize your value once you're gone. And by then, it's too late. It's a sad truth, but it's a truth nonetheless. Don't wait for them to realize your worth. Know your worth yourself, and act accordingly, the way you'd value any other veteran who served their country. It's not about being selfish, it's about being self-aware. It's about protecting your heart, your mind, and your soul, the same way you'd protect yourself in combat. Because sometimes the most dangerous battles aren't fought with weapons, but with words and actions from the people you thought you could trust.